In the music industry, success is usually measured by a single metric, hitting the #1 spot on the charts. This line graph reveals the flaw. A #1 peak only measures immediate hype, rarely accounting for a vertical crash back to zero. A more accurate measure is chart endurance, calculating total weeks a track survives on the Hot 100 before disappearing. When you apply this endurance metric to a catalog like the Beatles, the list of their greatest hits completely flips. The expected classics fall away, replaced by strange statistical anomalies. By isolating their 5 longest charting singles, we expose the actual mechanics of the music business. Surviving on the charts for months requires highly specific catalysts, overwhelming cultural volume, the disruption of industry standards, and precise historical timing. The first driver of chart survival is raw cultural mass. In early 1964, I Want to Hold Your Hand spent 15 weeks on the Hot 100.
Capitol Records physically could not manufacture enough vinyl to meet consumer demand. They contracted multiple outside pressing facilities to ship an estimated 250,000 copies every 24 hours. That logistical strain was driven by the band's February television appearances, which captured a staggering 73 million viewers in a single broadcast. The single only surrendered the top spot on the chart because a second Beatles track, She Loves You, pushed it out. In this scenario, longevity is a direct byproduct of a cultural event so dense that it completely saturates the public's attention, leaving oxygen for little else. The second driver of endurance relies on defying the established logistics of the music industry. In October 1969, the band issued a double A-side single, Come Together, Backed with Something. Across the country, radio program directors and jukebox operators made the unusual decision to begin spinning both tracks equally. Because Billboard tracked radio airplay separately, Something reached #3, while Come Together climbed to #2. Recognizing the split play, Billboard revised its charting policy in November 1969, merging the data of both sides into a single, massive 16-week chart entry. With Hey Jude, the band pushed industry boundaries even further. The record clocked in at 7 minutes and 11 seconds. Executives warned that radio stations would reject a 7-minute track because it consumed valuable commercial advertising time. Instead, stations abandoned their rigid formatting to broadcast the 4-minute outro in full, resulting in a 19-week chart run. When public demand reaches a certain threshold, the rigid institutions of the music industry will dismantle their own internal policies to accommodate the track, artificially extending its lifespan. The third driver relies on the passage of time and strategic nostalgia. During the 1966 Revolver sessions, the band recorded Got to Get You Into My Life. It remained an album cut and was entirely withheld as a commercial single during the decade. A full decade later, Capitol Records assembled a new compilation album and pulled the 10-year-old studio cut to serve as its lead promotional single. Dropping in June 1976, the track intersected with the American Bicentennial Summer. Top 40 Radio heavily embraced the resulting 1960s nostalgia, driving the song to a 16-week chart run that outlasted original #1 hits like Yesterday and Penny Lane. A record's survival doesn't always depend on its initial creation. It can be manufactured entirely by carefully timing its deployment to a new generation. The most enduring track in the Beatles' American catalog doesn't fit the expected profile. It is in a complex studio experiment or a Lennon-McCartney original. The ultimate champion is their 1963 one-take cover of the Isley Brothers' Twist and Shout, which accumulated a total of 26 weeks on the Billboard Hot 100. This chart history is fractured across 2 distinct eras. The song first logged 11 weeks during the peak of the British invasion in the spring of 1964. 22 years later, Hollywood intervened, placing the track at the center of 2 1986 comedy blockbusters, notably matching it to a high-profile street parade sequence. The theatrical exposure, combined with heavy MTV rotation of archival footage, prompted teenagers to seek out the record. That renewed demand pushed the single back onto the Hot 100 for an additional 15 weeks. Recorded in a single vocal shredding take at the very end of a 12-hour session, the song successfully crossed the divide between the vinyl era and the MTV generation. Measuring a song by its peak position only captures a moment of initial hype. Chart endurance reveals something entirely different, a raw, kinetic energy dormant in the culture, ready to reawaken exactly when an audience goes looking for it. The absolute peak of Beatlemania is often defined by the scale of the crowds, thousands of listeners captured in moments of total cultural saturation. When measuring this dominance today, the standard data point is 20 number-one hits on the Billboard Hot 100. This focus on peak positions overlooks the mechanics of the 1960s music market. It was an environment built on 45 RPM singles, moving at a speed dictated by aggressive weekly radio rotations and constant new releases from Capitol Records. This pace created a phenomenon known as chart cannibalization. Radio stations would often drop a popular Beatles record, not because interest had waned, but because a newer Beatles single had arrived to take its place. Under this rapid replacement cycle, surviving on the Hot 100 for more than 13 weeks was statistically improbable. Re-ranking the catalog by total weeks on the chart reveals a different historical hierarchy. In this view, iconic number ones often fall away, while sleeper tracks, some released by rival labels, emerge as the band's most durable recordings. Two of the band's biggest movie tie-ins reached that 13-week limit, the title tracks for A Hard Day's Night and Help. A Hard Day's Night was built around the distinctive chime of a Rickenbacker 12-string. It climbed to number one in the summer of 1964 and remained a national fixture for 3 months. United Artists leveraged major theatrical marketing to keep these songs in the public eye, ensuring they anchored the band's first cinematic ventures. John Lennon later described Help as one of his more honest early compositions, capturing a sense of personal isolation despite the energetic pop arrangement. Even these cinematic hits were eventually pushed aside. By October, Capitol Records had already begun shifting radio attention to newer studio sessions to clear room on retail shelves. These tracks demonstrate that even the strongest corporate synergy was eventually overtaken by the label's own release schedule. In 1970, Let It Be managed to exceed that 13-week mark. It entered the Hot 100 at number 6, setting a record for the highest debut in the chart's history. Paul McCartney wrote the song following a dream about his late mother, Mary, providing a moment of calm during a period of high tension within the group. The track's success was intertwined with the band's collapse. As the single topped the charts, McCartney publicly announced he had no future plans to work with the group. Radio stations kept the record in heavy rotation following the news, allowing Let It Be to spend 14 weeks on the Hot 100. For millions of listeners, the single stayed on the airwaves as a final word on the decade, outlasting the group's own partnership. The songs with the greatest staying power were often the ones the band's primary American label had once rejected. VJ Records held the rights to early tracks like Love Me Do. They released the song during the height of Beatlemania in 1964, where it maintained a 14-week run at a time when the market was already saturated with newer material. She Loves You followed a similar path. Initially released by the small Swan Records imprint in 1963, it failed to gain any traction and was largely ignored by radio programmers. Swan revived the track once the band's popularity exploded, running their pressing plants around the clock to meet the sudden demand. The record lasted 15 weeks on the chart. On March 21, 1964, it replaced I Want to Hold Your Hand at number 1, marking the first time an artist knocked themselves out of the top spot. The band's longest-running records were often the results of rival labels using these early masters to bypass the standard release timeline. Viewed through the lens of longevity, the Beatles' catalog looks vastly different than the standard list of number ones. While the industry prioritized rapid turnover and new product, certain songs found a way to resist that cycle. These recordings remained in circulation long after their initial promotional pushes ended. The public's continued interest in the group's sound ensured these tracks survived, even as labels moved on to newer material. A peak position captures a song's immediate impact. Longevity tracks the length of time an audience is willing to stay with a specific recording after that initial marketing push ends. The Beatles' most durable records were those that survived in spite of the rapid turnover of the 1960s, held on the charts by a public that dictated its own pace.